at what passes for dawn, though dawn is far too generous a word. The world rouses beneath a pall of shrieks and drifting ash. No sunrise ever breaks this horizon, only a slow exposure of the same oppressive murk that never departs. Such is existence beneath chaos dominion. A daily cycle so warped and joyless that I must force the words into sound to convince myself it is not a fevered hallucination. I rise from a ragged mattress inside a blackened tenement, hacking up the acrid soot that lines my throat and lungs. Whether the air bites with cold or burns with fever, I can no longer tell. For the warp-sickened atmosphere swings without mercy between clammy chill and stifling heat. Dim outlines stir in the half-light. Other survivors, or what fragments of humanity remain, dragging themselves toward yet another repetition of dread. No rooster heralds the morning, no bell calls the day to order. Only a battered vox horn wails from some shattered wall, spitting guttural decrees in a tongue half-high Gothic, half-unholy chant. That is the measure of our reveille. Each day begins under a weight of weariness, haunted by the endless screaming that stains every night. Should sleep visit at all, it gifts only warped parables of waking terror, spawned by the capricious warp. Truly, nightmare and reality are indistinguishable here. There is no gentle ritual of mourning, no pause to clear the fog from our eyes or trade soft words with someone dear. To hesitate is to invite the lash or punishments far crueler. We rise together in a sluggish, stumbling column of emaciated shapes, each clutching some foul rag or shredded scrap pretending to be a coat. My breath drifts out in a pale mist. The manufactoria have yet to belch their poisonous heat, and every joint throbs with the dull ache of yesterday's forced toil. No whistle calls for breakfast, no scent of coffee, only the acrid sting of fear to flavor the morning. Hunger claws at empty stomachs, yet none dare hunt for food before the allotted time. To try is to be branded a thief, and the price for that brand is swift, public, and final. We gather in what remains of the courtyard, a plaza collapsed into fractured stone and broken effigies. Beneath the cracked gaze of toppled imperial statues, faces now gouged and scored with the 8-pointed star, we arrange ourselves in rigid rows. Roll call drags on in a lifeless monotone. An overseer, a human collaborator swathed in spiked leather and fraying finery, stalks the ranks with a data slate heavy with quotas and figures. He never bothers with names. To him, we are mere entries in a ledger of expendable flesh. All of us keep our eyes lowered as he passes. A single glance could be mistaken for defiance and invite the lash or worse. The air reeks of unwashed bodies and carries the metallic tang of dried blood that will never leave the stones. At times, a booming vox horn shatters the cold silence, intoning a dawn prayer of profane catechisms we are compelled to mimic. Each blasphemous syllable scorches my throat like acid. Praises to the dark gods, curses spat at the so-called emperor. We learned fast that even a stray thought naming him anything but false or accursed is perilous. Some whisper the required replies with mechanical obedience. A few add a faint hiss of mockery, if reckless enough, while others simply shape the words in silence. Safer to feign devotion than to risk being marked for indifference. The cult priests and their overseer hounds sense weakness the way carrion beasts scent blood, and pity the soul who fails to sound convincing. I have watched the unlucky hauled from the ranks and savaged for no crime greater than a cracked voice during those profane oaths. So we force out our chants with as much counterfeit fervor as we can summon, desperate to vanish inside the chorus of the damned. Long ago, beneath imperial order, our mournings held different rites. Pledges to the god emperor, mild work songs, dull hymns I once thought endless. I would give anything now to hear a single, uncorrupted hymn in place of these poisonous invocations. The mind adapts in cruel ways. What was once tedious now glows like lost treasure. When the compulsory rites and endless roll calls conclude, the day's labor begins. There is no commute as before. Instead, the work gangs are driven at gunpoint to their appointed drudgery. I fall into line among laborers shackled together at the neck, a human chain dragged through the ashen half-light. The iron links clatter with every movement, the only music our lives now know. Our path might lead to the shattered husk of a manufactorum, where an entire day is spent prying scrap metal from ruin and dragging it to the forges. Or perhaps to the vast construction site that once served as our civic heart. Some days I'm driven to the slag pits or the choking refineries. Others to dismantle what remains of the old governor's palace, feeding every stone into the ever-hungry furnaces. Work crews change only when a task is finally exhausted, or when enough of us have perished that replacements must be drawn. To our overseers, we are nothing more than interchangeable cogs in an immense, joyless engine. The labor itself is death masquerading as duty. Imagine a wasteland of collapsed habitation blocks and gutted temples, every remnant methodically cannibalized for raw material. Smoke pours as demon-forged machines snarl and grind, shoving aside wreckage or drilling deep into the earth, their engines screaming like tormented spirits. We slaves scuttle behind, clawing through rubble and wrestling twisted iron with bare hands. For nothing, absolutely nothing, is permitted to go to waste. Each brick of our past is reworked into the conqueror's grand desecrations. Truth be told, existence here was brutal even before chaos claimed it. This world had never been a paradise under the Imperium. I grew up beneath the soot of endless chimneys and the heel of Imperial command. We endured long shifts and merciless discipline then as well. Yet there were laws, a brittle structure, and the faint illusion that our suffering contributed to some larger human purpose. Even if that promise rang hollow, under chaos rule, there is no illusion of higher purpose. Suffering is dealt out at random, for cruelty's pleasure or simple amusement. In its bleak way, that is almost candid. No hollow slogans of duty cloak the lash. They strike us because they wish to. Often trip over skulls and scorched servo skulls half sunk in debris, ghostly remnants of the world that once was. If commanded, we pitch even those into the recycler. The irony bites deep. We dismantle the last fragments of our own civilization to erect monuments for our oppressors. Corpses litter every path. Some date to the first onslaught, others are fresh, victims of exhaustion or of a whimsy execution. We drag the dead aside in rough heaps. Sometimes a special crew arrives to haul them away. Other times they lie until rot claims them or the next demolition buries them anew. On the vilest days, we are ordered to strip the fallen, scavenging clothes and trinkets, some destined for cloth or leather, others kept as grisly trophies. I have done it with lifeless fingers, gagging as I tugged boots from a neighbor's rigid feet, his face still frozen in the terror of dying. Here, the dead are granted no dignity. Every body is fodder for the war machine in one form or another. Rumor drifts through the lines that some of these cadavers vanish into so-called meat factories, to be ground and reprocessed, reappearing as the very rations set before us. I would like to dismiss such whispers as fantasy, yet the flavor of our ration broth often carries a hint too foul to ignore. Not far away, enormous smelteries vomit smoke into the ashen sky. I have watched them tip whole mountains of rubble, stone, iron, bone alike, into blazing vats of molten fire. The conquering priests harbor their own vision for this world, to melt it down and recast it into something unholy. Brick by blackened brick. We are the fuelers of that vision, feeding the furnaces with the wreckage of all we once cherished. Hours drag on like a sentence with no end. Backs bow, hands split and bleed as we shoulder load after load of ruin. Thick dust mingles with biting chemical vapor until it cakes our tongues and scorches our lungs. The air itself becomes a poison meal. Coughing is constant, a dry rasping chorus from chests already black with soot. Some fall into fits of bloody coughing that never cease, and they seldom survive long afterward. At steady intervals comes the snap of a whip or the crackle of a shock prod, the overseer's crude language of control. Those overseers are of several breeds, and none are kind. Some are mere traitor guardsmen, eyes cold and smirks idle, content to menace us with their rifles. Others, far worse, move among them. A cadre clad in slick, oily black suits with featureless masks and grill-like vox mouths. One glimpse of those faceless enforcers is enough to make you pray that their gaze slides past. Their voices rasp in a hellish tongue that built-in translators grind into curt, low Gothic orders. Work faster, no idling. Lift, you vermin. These creatures have syringes or needle-tipped talons where fingers should be, and they wield them without restraint. I once watched one stab a man in the spine for hesitating a single heartbeat. The victim convulsed and howled as whatever toxin or stimulant seared through his veins, then staggered back to his task. He had no alternative. To be hauled away for discipline is worse, for those taken rarely return whole, if they return at all. We all know that one person's weakness can condemn everyone linked to the same chain. I remember when the worker directly ahead of me, an older man whose name I never learned, simply collapsed from sheer fatigue. He bore a hunk of rocket casing far too heavy, and his legs buckled. The chain jerked tight between us. Reflex made me halt, which sent the man behind me reeling. In that instant of confusion, the overseer struck, descending like carrion crows. One of those black-suited fiends drove a needle straight into the fallen man's neck without a word. Another lashed my shoulders for the crime of slowing. White-hot pain slashed across my back, but I bit down on any cry. They despise unsanctioned screams. The fallen man convulsed as the injected toxin ripped through him. By the time the needle was wrenched free, he was motionless. Dead or merely frozen, I could not tell. They left the chain fastened, simply severed the iron link at his collar, and dragged the slack body aside like discarded freight. None of us turned our heads. We fixed our eyes forward and kept moving, even as we stepped through the streak of blood he left behind. Here, collapse makes you nothing more than debris to be cleared. Eventually, what I assume is midday though, time is meaningless in this endless smoky twilight. A discordant horn shrieks twice. That is the signal to halt. We drop where we stand, too drained to care about jagged rubble pressing into our flesh. My muscles quiver with fleeting relief, though I know the pause will be cruelly short. Down the line, an overseer lumbers past, a sloshing container strapped to his back, ladling out what they call food. It never changes. A greasy, lukewarm protein gruel poured into dented tin cups or dumped straight into our cupped hands. Today's ration is a murky brown sludge with a taste of iron and bile. I swallow because there is no alternative. Everyone forces it down. It is swallow or starve, and none of us possess the strength to refuse. A few newcomers retch on their first mouthful, but they learn quickly. Either choke it down and keep it down, or vanish within days. I try not to think about what might lurk in that sludge. The Imperium's old nutrition paste was vile enough, but at least I knew it came from corpse starch and recycled plant matter. Better not to guess. Survival is the only measure that matters. Around us, the din of war machines and the distant drone of unholy chants never ceases. Even during our brief pause, a floating Vox drone, called a Discord, hovers close, murmuring a low chaos of whispers and faint screams, just soft enough to gnaw at the edges of thought. Silence does not exist here. Even in rest, something presses into your skull. A sound, a stench, a crawling sensation that reminds you the dark gods are always watching. Sometimes our labor is broken by the passage of those who rule us. This afternoon, for example, a column of red-armored Chaos Space Marines marched down the avenue beside the site. At a single shrill whistle, we scattered to clear a path, flattening ourselves against heaps of rubble or dropping prone in the dust. None of us dared raise a gaze. Even the overseers bent their heads as the Astartes strode past. The ground shuddered under the ponderous rhythm of their ceramite boots, and the very air tingled with the metallic charge of their presence. An aura of raw menace prickles every hair along my neck. They scarcely glance our way. To them, we are beneath insects. Yet even through the terror, I sense a strange current of anticipation in their ranks. You learn to read such omens. Perhaps a new assault is poised to begin, or some blasphemous rite nears its hour. Whatever the cause, once they pass, the overseers drive us with renewed savagery, as if the warrior's presence has fed their cruelty. Fear cascades downward through the hierarchy, and those of us at the bottom always suffer its final blow. As the endless labor grinds toward what might be evening, exhaustion becomes a creature in itself, gnawing at muscle and bone. There is no true dusk here, only the thickening of smog overhead and the distant flicker of forged temple fires along the horizon. At last, a horn brays the signal that the shift is over, though it is no act of mercy, merely pragmatism. Even slaves lose efficiency when pushed past breaking, and our masters know it. We are driven back to our habitation pens in ragged clusters under guard. Some stagger so badly they can barely keep their feet. Only when we are locked behind walls and fences are the chains removed from our collars, not out of compassion, but because there is nowhere to flee and no strength left to flee with. Nights inside the HAB zones bring a different flavor of torment. We are packed by the dozens into whatever buildings still remain upright, mostly half-collapsed HAB blocks crudely braced with scavenged metal. A few fortunate ones claim a corroded cot or a threadbare mat. Most of us curl on bare stone or hard-packed earth. The only illumination comes from sputtering torches or guttering braziers in the corridors, their red light throwing demon-like shadows that writhe across the walls. The air is foul, steeped in sweat, blood, and despair. We drop into our corners, muscles aflame, blisters cracked and raw. Some try to dress their wounds with filthy scraps of cloth or exchange hushed tips on avoiding infection, though everyone knows true cleanliness is impossible. Water is a rarity. Our ration arrives in dented tin cans, scarcely enough to wet a parched throat, let alone wash away the grime. I swallow my portion with a gratitude that borders on madness, thankful for liquid that tastes faintly of rust and decay. Such is what we have become. Outside, curfew tightens like a noose. None dare cross a doorway after the shift. When darkness falls, the streets belong to the occupiers and their chosen predators. From the distance come the guttural growls of mutant warhounds and the metallic cadence of armored patrols combing the ruins for anyone foolish enough to stray. We are herded in for the night, like livestock penned in a corral. Now and then, a thin lance of searchlight sweeps across the gaps in our boarded windows, or the mechanical whir of a surveillance servitor drone buzzes past to confirm every body is where it must be. Anyone found outside without sanction after dark is effectively condemned, likely to a fate worse than death. For by dawn, their punishment is displayed as a warning. Within these overcrowded chambers, we speak little and softly. It is said the walls themselves listen. Strange sigils etched into the corners by sorcerers suggest more than rumor, and none of us care to test what warp-born devices might be hidden there. In the first weeks, some still whispered memories or fragile prayers for rescue. Now most sit in blank silence or cry into their sleeves when they think no one is looking. A few persist in offering tiny mercies. The sharing of a tattered blanket, a half-forgotten lullaby hummed low, a quiet word that tomorrow might hurt less, though we all know it will not. These minute kindnesses are all that survives of ordinary humanity, brief sparks of warmth in an existence otherwise frozen and pitiless. We cling to them while knowing that compassion here is as perilous as rebellion. Show too much care for another soul, and you risk accusation of secret fellowship or conspiracy. More than once, I have seen a single gesture of sympathy repaid by the sudden crack of a bolter round. If the guards even suspect a glimmer of solidarity, they descend without mercy. So every act of compassion must be smuggled in silence, unspoken, uncelebrated, and swiftly forgotten. When sleep finally takes us, it is never restful. Almost everyone here is tormented by nightmares, cruel and brilliantly vivid. From every corner come faint whimpers, the grinding of teeth, bodies twitching in uneasy dreams. I am no different. My own sleep replays the day's punishments or invents fresh horrors from the warp-tainted ether. More than once, I have jerked awake to a strangled cry that cuts off mid-note, leaving behind a void so complete it feels alive. Was it only a night terror or something worse moving through the dark? No one can say. Sometimes morning reveals a vacant bunk, its former occupant vanished without a trace. Perhaps the overseers dragged them away for some hidden crime. Or perhaps something older and darker slipped in to claim them. Here, imagination is barely distinct from fact. Reality itself is a living horror tale. And so the days repeat, a grinding cycle of dread and forced labor. The monotony itself becomes our universe, hideously predictable in its torments, yet strangely dependable, a cruel rhythm we learn to inhabit. Eventually, you stop asking when it might end. You stop believing it ever could. Life is reduced to a tally of shifts, of screams, and of the hollow pauses in between. If this daily existence is a slow, unending bleed, there are moments when it spikes into pure nightmare. Rituals, mass executions, and unspeakable atrocities that blaze like lightning against the constant storm of fear, searing themselves into memory and proving that the pit can always sink deeper than yesterday. From time to time, the overlords proclaim a grand rite or festival to glorify their dark gods. These are no celebrations by any human meaning, yet every one of us must attend and feign absolute devotion. One such night is carved into my memory despite every effort to erase it. It marked the anniversary of our world's fall, when the word-bearers staged a vast midnight convocation in the shattered central square. Thousands were driven at gunpoint into the wreckage of what once served as our bustling market, now twisted into an open-air temple. The toppled statues of imperial heroes lay heaped like refuse, replaced by towering spires of black iron hung with skulls and haloed in the guttering light of hellish braziers. We were forced to kneel in concentric circles around a raised dais. Upon that blackened platform, their high priest appeared, a dark apostle clad in baroque, blood-red power armor inscribed with blasphemous scripture, and began to speak, His voice, magnified through vox amplifiers, rolled like thunder in a language none of us knew, certainly not High Gothic, more likely the foul lexicon of the warp. Yet the meaning was unmistakable. A fusion of raw hatred and exultant ecstasy that made our very teeth vibrate. Around him, a ring of chanting cultists swayed and howled, while behind them, towering giants in Terminator plate hammered vast drums that throbbed like a monstrous heart. Then came the sacrifices. There are always sacrifices. This night they dragged a chain of captives to the dais. Fellow citizens branded as traitors to chaos or merely unlucky enough to be chosen. Among them I recognized a teacher from my own Hab block, a gentle woman once known for tending the neighborhood creche. Now she knelt in chains, body daubed with sigils drawn from her own blood. One by one, the Dark Apostle presented them to his gods. I force myself to remember, though every detail sickens me. One throat opened above a great brass brazier, while praises to the blood, God hissed through rising steam. Another victim consigned alive to fire for the Prince of Excess, her screams weaving eerily with a discordant choir. And a third, a stout old man who spat defiance until his final breath plunged into a reeking vat to glorify the Plague Lord. Last came a fourth offering, a young administratum acolyte, if memory serves, condemned to something perhaps crueler than death. The Dark Apostle and his coven of sorcerers chanted in unison until unnatural flames wreathed the victim. Yet he did not burn. Instead, his body convulsed, shrieking as additional limbs tore through his flesh and his face dissolved into a shifting blur without end. A gift to the changer of ways, beyond doubt. By the finale, what remained was dragged away. A mewling, mindless spawn. Each death that night became a separate prayer to a different ruinous power. Then the order came for us to cheer and give thanks. Imagine it. Our voices thin and trembling, a few breaking into hysterics. Yet all of us obeyed, because refusal meant becoming the next sacrifice. What followed the slaughter was in its own way worse. The air itself grew alive with malignant power. A foul wind whipped through the square, carrying a chorus of otherworldly wails. Reality bent and folded. There is no other word. The space above the dais split open into a bruise-colored wound, and in the corner of my vision, impossible shapes writhed, contorted beyond reason. Many around me flung themselves prostrate, faces pressed to the broken stone. I did the same, daring only fleeting glances, enough to glimpse slavering demonic forms sliding from that rent in the world, winged and loping figures that circled the apostle like adoring beasts. The Dark Apostle lifted his arms in exultation as a vast, bestial presence solidified overhead, eyes glowing like live embers, its laughter a deep vibration that shuddered straight through my skull. We were commanded to rejoice at this so-called blessing. Hundreds shrieked praises in manic desperation, while others simply screamed in blind panic. I merely knelt, trembling, mouthing whatever sounds might pass as devotion. In that instant, I was certain we would all be butchered next, consumed by the nightmares we had helped to summon. But as abruptly as it began, the wound in the sky sealed shut. The demons vanished, or perhaps merely slipped beyond our sight. The rite had met its infernal aim. They left us breathing, shattered and weeping, minds forever scarred, but alive. I often wonder if that mercy was deliberate, to ensure we would carry the memory like a brand. Such spectacles are not daily events, yet they loom like black monoliths in our thoughts, punctuation marks of terror in an endless run-on sentence of misery. Afterward, we returned to labor more broken than before. If it sounds impossible, that common folk could witness living nightmares, and then resume digging ditches at dawn. That is simply the price of survival. We compartmentalize, we bury terror until it festers out of sight, because to crumble would mean death. Faith, or what remains of it, has warped beyond recognition. In the early days of occupation, many still whispered the imperial creed in darkness, clutching hidden icons of the emperor and praying for rescue. We begged for deliverance, believing someone might yet come. We once believed, fervently, that the Imperium would return in force, that the emperor himself would hear our cries and send deliverance. But no salvation came. As months bled into years, that hope shriveled like a plant rooted in poisoned soil. One by one, even the most devout fell mute. Some concluded the emperor had abandoned us. Others began to doubt he was divine at all, certainly no equal to the palpable gods now worshipped openly around us. Chaos propaganda never ceases. Day and night, blasphemous sermons hammer at us, proclaiming that only the ruinous powers possess true strength and ultimate truth. I hate to confess it, but their indoctrination sometimes takes root. I've seen men and women broken by despair begin to nod in grim agreement with the dark apostles' rants, even whispering chaos prayers when they think no one hears. Perhaps some genuinely convert. Perhaps others simply decide that siding with the victors offers the best chance to keep breathing. In this place, sincerity and sheer desperation are nearly indistinguishable. Now there are those among us who have fully embraced the new order. Whether from conviction or the lure of escaping perpetual victimhood, they display the sigils of chaos with perverse pride. And these collaborators, once neighbors and friends, often prove the cruelest of all. Eager to flaunt loyalty, they surpass even the occupiers in brutality. I know of a former city administrator who has remade himself into a priest of the dark gods, presiding over public denunciations of anyone suspected of imperial loyalty and personally supervising floggings. Another, once merely a factory foreman, now thrives by betraying his crew, eagerly reporting the slightest murmur of dissent in return for a slightly fuller ration bowl and a scrap of petty authority. We loathe such turncoats, but fear them even more. They move unnoticed among us, and no one can be sure who might secretly belong to their ranks, ready to betray a careless sigh or a wistful word about the old days. The warp's taint also leaves its signature on flesh. Under the Emperor's rule, even the smallest mutation meant execution or exile. Under chaos, deformity spreads openly and is sometimes welcomed. After years of breathing warp-poisoned air and standing beneath currents of foul, unseen energy, it is no wonder that bodies begin to warp. I have watched coworkers sprout patches of slick scales or gain an extra knuckle on each finger, or eyes that gleam like an animal's in darkness. The overseers rarely punish these changes. Some even hail them as blessings. One young laborer who grew a slender tentacle where his tongue should have been was quietly taken aside by a cult recruiter instead of sent back to the work gangs. The dark gods, it seems, had another purpose for him. Those marked by visible mutations often carry themselves with a strange mixture of pride and shame, caught between fear of what they have become and the grim knowledge that their transformation might also grant them favor. Pride at being marked by chaos mingles with a gnawing dread of mutating further into something no longer human. That dread is entirely justified. From time to time, someone is overtaken by a sudden, violent transformation, twisting into a mindless chaos spawn before our eyes. When such a nightmare erupts, the occupiers treat it as both spectacle and weapon, sometimes unleashing the new abomination like a rabid beast upon a chosen target, other times cutting it down without hesitation if it serves no purpose. Either fate is more horrifying than death, and every one of us knows it could strike without warning, like lightning from a diseased sky. Disease itself has become part of daily existence, yet even sickness is bent to serve chaos. In the cramped filth of our shelters, contagion spreads with ease. Fevers, flux, strange wasting afflictions no healer can name. Under the Imperium, medici teams or sanitation crews might at least have tried to contain an outbreak, however coldly. Under chaos, the opposite holds true. The rulers exult in pestilence, proclaiming decay as proof of divine favor. I remember vividly when a grotesque swelling plague swept through our district, staining skin a parchment yellow and making blood leak from eyes and ears. Instead of isolating the sick or seeking remedies, the new masters celebrated the outbreak as a blessing from Grandfather Nurgle, laughing while the infected writhed. For days the streets stank of sweet rot and buzzing flies, and those who survived carried scars and weakness that never healed, grim reminders of how thoroughly corruption here is worshipped as holy. They urged us to venerate the plague, to let it spread unchecked. A grotesque procession wound through the shanties, led by chanting pestilent zealots who smeared themselves with filth and waved their arms as if to sanctify the air with deeper corruption. The stench of decay was suffocating. Within days, the dead lay stacked in heaps. In despair, some began praying to Nurgle, hoping that displays of devotion might earn survival. Did it work? No one can truly say. Perhaps those few who endured the sickness, faces cratered with pox and lungs rattling with a lifelong cough, were simply lucky. Yet the occupiers treated their survival as divine selection. They welcomed these scarred survivors into a dedicated Nurgle cult, tasking them with handing out fungus-ridden bread and tending the next round of contagion. In this way, even our misery is harnessed to tighten their grip. And disease is not the only means of thinning our ranks. At intervals, the overseers perform what can only be called a culling. They arrive without warning, in the dead of night or at shift change, carrying lists of names, or merely a quota of warm bodies. No reason is offered. Those chosen are herded onto trucks or landing craft and vanish into the smoke. Perhaps they are driven to distant war fronts as expendable cannon fodder, or delivered to the Dark Mechanicum for unspeakable experiments, or sacrificed en masse in some blood rite on another world. We never know. We only know they do not return, and the void they leave behind reminds us how cheaply life is spent in this dominion of ruin. We never learn their fates. Only vacant bunks and a heavier silence remain. After each roundup, a pall of terror settles over the barracks for days. You whisper prayers, whether to the God Emperor or whatever hidden power still lingers in your heart, begging that your name will not be spoken next. It is a grim lottery where the winners are the doomed. Those left behind endure a bitter mix of guilty relief and dread, knowing the next purge may claim them. Yet the Chaos Masters themselves are far from united. They feud and conspire constantly. We have come to read the omens, a sudden shift in patrol colors, a fresh sigil painted over the old on-fortress walls, gunfire crackling from their own barracks at odd hours. Such signs mean one warband has displaced another, or a champion has seized power from his superior. When that happens, our existence veers overnight from one flavor of hell to another. I recall when the Chaos Lord who first commanded this occupation departed with his elite retinue to fight elsewhere, leaving rival word-bearer dark apostles to divide the planet among themselves. Their competition was immediate and vicious. Each sought to prove greater devotion to the dark gods, and for us that meant escalating sacrificial quotas, clashing decrees, and confusion that slaughtered many slaves outright. Two dark apostles once clashed over whether to raise more monuments or ship additional slaves off-world to fuel a distant crusade. Their compromise was cruelty itself. We were driven twice as hard to accomplish both. Another time, a minor civil war erupted inside the garrison between a corn-worshipping warband and a sly Slanshi cult. For a brief, bloody span, they battled openly in the streets, while we civilians cowered in cellars and rubble, listening to God-crazed warriors butcher each other over doctrinal slights or private grudges. When the smoke thinned, the victors punished us as if we were to blame for their carnage. Such is the pattern. We pay the cost of every internal feud. And even as we suffer, the planet itself warps beneath chaos rule, its soil and sky slowly remade into something as hostile and twisted as the masters who claim it. I sometimes wonder if our world is slowly transforming into a demon world, piece by cursed piece. The sky itself has grown strange, no longer just the bruise-colored haze of pollution, but streaked with sickly greens and slashed by vivid purple lightning that dances without natural cause. We have endured rains that stank of sulfur, leaving burning rashes wherever the drops touched bare skin, and once a storm of literal blood that poured for an hour. The ground, too, grows unstable. In certain districts, reality feels thin, as if stretched like old parchment. You can pass an alley and see the shadows lean toward you, or catch a whisper in no earthly tongue. Ruined buildings sag and warp as though kneaded by an unholy hand. From cracks in the pavement erupt uncanny growths, pulsing fungal masses or thorned vines that seem to murmur when approached. We skirt those places, for when the planet itself sprouts eyes and teeth, you know sanity has fled. It is no surprise that many have lost their minds entirely. Some sit rocking in corners, silent and unreachable, their spirits shattered beyond mending. Others break into hysterical laughter or sudden screaming fits, forcing companions to hold them down before the guards notice. A few simply wander into the wasteland beyond the city walls, choosing the nameless horrors of the wilds over the certain torture here. None ever return. We assume they die or become something no longer human. Part of me envies the completely mad. Perhaps their minds, already broken, no longer register the nightmare around them. Or perhaps they have slipped into some private dream where chaos cannot reach. Either way, their escape, however final, sometimes feels like the only true freedom left. At least, madness might grant a kind of release from fully comprehending this nightmare. To remain lucid here, to see every detail clearly, is its own form of torment. Hope itself has become a blade with two edges, one we no longer dare to grasp. In the beginning, we clung to it, imagining the Emperor's hosts descending in brilliance to drive out our oppressors. But, as I have said, that hope withered slowly and painfully. Now I am no longer sure Imperial salvation would mean what we once dreamed. We know too well what Imperial reclamation can bring. Should this world be retaken, the Inquisition or the Astra Militarum would likely brand us irredeemably corrupted. At best, we might be herded into penal camps or condemned to distant labor battalions. At worst, a cleansing virus bomb or a firing squad would complete the ruin chaos began. Such is the cruelest irony. The rescue we once begged for might prove our final destruction. So we have stopped hoping for deliverance. We have stopped hoping for anything at all. We simply endure, existing from one bleak moment to the next. Because to imagine otherwise is to invite a deeper despair than even chaos can provide. I am not entirely sure why I record any of this. Perhaps it is a last, stubborn act of defiance, to prove that someone remembered, that someone witnessed and understood what was done here. Maybe these words are meant for a distant soul, living far away in time or space. might one day find this account and doubt that such things ever truly happened. I would not blame you for disbelief. Even while enduring it, I sometimes struggle to accept that it is not some fevered hallucination. But it is real. This has been our life and our history, etched in blood and terror beneath the iron tread of chaos. We know our names will never appear on an honor roll. No one will raise a monument to us, except for the obscene black spires we were forced to build in homage to our captors. When all of this ends, if it ever ends, our story will almost certainly be buried or forgotten amid the greater chronicles of the galactic wars. Yet if these words endure, let them at least testify that we were human, and that we fought in small, quiet ways to keep a shred of humanity alive in a place designed to erase it. In the end, what else can be said? We endure until we cannot, holding fast to the last fragments of ourselves as long as breath and memory remain. Each dawn, or whatever pale mockery of dawn passes for morning here, we rise into the same nightmare. And each night we collapse, grateful for the brief oblivion of sleep, haunted though it may be. There is no grand ending for us, no heroic victory waiting just beyond the horizon. There is only the endless grind. Another day, then another, until at last we stumble and join the countless dead already swallowed by the shadows. If you are reading this, then you dwell in the light of a world that perhaps has never known such darkness. Consider yourself fortunate, and remember us. Remember that we were here, that we endured, and that, in the face of absolute despair, we lived as long as we were able, even stripped of hope. This, then, is the legacy of our time beneath chaos, a life of unbroken night, carried forward only by the stubborn inertia of survival itself. And when it ends not in thunder or defiance, not even in a cry for mercy, but with a long, low sigh of surrender. An exhalation that lingers for a moment before vanishing into the silence.